What will the new JobKeeper rate be after September?
Well, I will let the Prime Minister and the Treasurer announce that in a few hours from now, but what I can confirm is that JobKeeper and JobSeeker will continue to be paid at current rates until the end of September. We will then extend JobKeeper for 6 months from the end of September at a lower rate, and JobSeeker till the end of the year also at a lower rate. And I mean, this will be part of, I guess, phasing the Australian community out of the elevated levels of support that have been provided over this current first 6 months period.
What will that cost?
Well, again, I mean, that goes to all of the specifics. I mean, in the 2019-20 financial year, we have had to make payments of $56 billion in additional payments as a result of the decisions that we've made to support business, to support the economy, to support jobs and to support those Australians who lost their job, and indeed to provide additional support to our health system. We will be reconciling, of course, later in the week in the economic statement the fiscal impact of all of these measures.
We're going through $1 trillion, though, in total debt, though, aren't we?
Well, again, I mean, we will be releasing our economic and fiscal update on Thursday. That will reconcile the fiscal impact of all of the decisions that we've made so far, and indeed the impact of the economic downturn on our revenue and our expenditure.
OK, just on the JobKeeper, I mean, you mentioned in your report that some 900,000 Australians effectively received a pay rise. Is it fair that that should continue right up until the end of September?
Well, you know, essentially, when we made decisions at the end of March to provide this support into the economy, the speed was of the essence. The need for speed was of the essence. It was to provide macroeconomic support, and there were a range of objectives. Yes, to support business and to save jobs and to keep employees connected to their employers, but also to provide income support and to provide macroeconomic support. And so from that point of view, we always said that that would be for an initial 6 months period. We will be addressing this for the next 6 months period. But until the end of September, things will continue as they are, and things will change from the beginning of October. OK,
well, just on to some specifics. It has been reported today that the new JobKeeper rate will be $1,200 a fortnight, so it's come down $300 a fortnight. Is that accurate?
Well, again, I mean, as I've said in my first answer, I will let the Prime Minister and the Treasurer make the specific announcements, but there will be a lower payment, and this is part of weaning business off this transitional support payment as we continue through this transition over a further 6 months period.
OK, so should I even ask you about JobSeeker and whether it will be above $700, which is being reported today?
Well, we will be continuing to provide elevated JobSeeker payments till the end of this year, and the ongoing arrangements beyond the end of December, will be a matter for the budget. OK.
It's going to be two-tiered, and it's based on fresh eligibility tests. What are the markers going to be for Tier 1 and Tier 2?
Well, so this will be determined based on hours worked. So, I mean, again, I mean, the specifics will be part of the announcement later today. But, essentially a quarter of recipients in the first 6 months period were receiving more than they would have in the context of the hours they ordinarily worked. And, moving forward, there'll be two tiers based on hours worked, which, will lead to a higher payment and a lower payment.
How often will people or businesses be tested?
For those who became eligible in the first 6 months period, once they were in for the full 6 months. What we will be doing from here on in is to reapply the turnover test at the beginning of October and again at the beginning of January to ensure that businesses still need that support and that they maintain eligibility for that support through this next period.
OK, so there's going to be two tests there. Two tests, 1 October, 1 January, did you say, as part of the next round of financial measures. So that's when people will be tested, whether they're in Tier 1 or Tier 2.
No, the test I talked about for the beginning of October and the beginning of January is the turnover test. That's to ensure that businesses still are experiencing the relevant reduction in the level of turnover.
And is there a level of reduction that they have to achieve, and what is that?
Well, the level of reduction is what it was, and that is for businesses with a turnover of up to $1 billion. It's a 30% reduction. For businesses with a turnover above $1 billion, it's a 50% reduction.
Okay, so that remains unchanged.
The percentage, the turnover test remains unchanged, but it will be reapplied, whereas, of course, in the initial 6 months period, once businesses were qualified, they remained in the program for the full 6 months period. But moving forward from the end of September, there'll be 2 tests, beginning of October and the beginning of January.
Why did you decide on a 6-month extension?
Well, the judgment, this was based on advice, and the judgment that we've made is that this is the appropriate period, given the experiences from some of the businesses on the front line of the economic impact of this crisis, that the most appropriate transition out of this back into the new normal would be a further 6 months.
And how flexible will the government have to be, considering there may well be further shutdowns?
Well, this is a demand-driven program, and further shutdowns will mean that businesses in affected areas are more likely to qualify, because they're more likely to meet the 30 and 50% reductions in turnover.
But by extending by 6 months, I mean, that's an indication that you're not really expecting the economic conditions to get much better in that time.
Well, the economic conditions have already got much better than what we thought they would be at the end of March. Across Australia, I mean, with the exception of 2 jurisdictions, I mean, across most of Australia, the level of active cases is very, very low. The level of community transmission is quasi non-existent. Yes, we've got a particular challenge in Victoria and in parts of New South Wales, and it's going to be very important to get on top of that as swiftly as possible.
Yeah, and if there are further shutdowns, which there may well be, is that going to be flexible? Will the government allow further changes to be made?
Well, it's a demand-driven program, and to the extent that further shutdowns impact on specific businesses, I mean, that will no doubt be reflected in increased eligibility in those affected areas. I mean, that's the way demand-driven programs operate.
And just finally, I mean, looking back at what you've been able to hand out so far, the JobKeeper and the JobSeeker program, would you call it a success?
Well, look, we've been dealing with a very difficult circumstance, and but we do believe that the JobKeeper and the enhanced JobSeeker arrangements worked as intended. I mean, that they were successful in putting a floor under the economy and provide necessary, much-needed support to business, to working Australians and those Australians who lost their job. But it's still a tough circumstance. I mean, there's no question.
And what didn't work? What failed, in your opinion?
Well, look, I mean, we had to make decisions very quickly. We did the best we could. We believe that overall, by and large, things have worked as intended, and we'll continue to make adjustments. And indeed, the Prime Minister and the Treasurer will be announcing some adjustments today. Do
you concede, though, that some of the handouts perhaps were a disincentive for people to work?
Well, we knew that when we went into it, but I mean, there are trade-offs here. I mean, we had to make judgments about providing macroeconomic support into the economy and income support into the economy very swiftly. We knew that that would create distortions, but over a temporary period, we accepted that that would be the case. But certainly, the longer these sorts of elevated support payments remain in place, the distortions and the disincentives become more accentuated, which is why it is important that we start the phasing out, the sensible and responsible phasing out of this temporary level support.